Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Ilia Nicoleta. I am a career legal studies student at UWS, and I work as community and voter engagement intern with Jackets Vote, a program of the League Center. I would like to start today's event by reading UW Superior's land acknowledgement statement. In honor of the Anishinaabe people, the original peoples and caretakers of this land, we would like to recognize that the University of Wisconsin Superior inhabits the land of the Ojibwe people. Please take a moment to honor and celebrate ancestral Ojibwe land and the sacred lands of our indigenous people. Thank you. As I said earlier, I work in the Link Center. The Link Center is a meaningful connection point linking students at the university with the community and beyond. We cultivate a rich network of partnerships, support the student career and civic readiness, and provide strategic programming, leadership, and support for students, the campus and region. The Jackets Vote program was developed in 2019 to build a nonpartisan institution to increase voter participation. The program works to secure this goal by providing the resources and support needed by students for civic learning, political engagement, and participation in elections. Jackets Vote seeks to achieve a higher voter registration rate among students, providing the necessary resources and tools for students' voter education. Today's panel is about why does the Wisconsin Supreme Court race matters. This panel is meant to discuss the relationship between the United States Constitution voting and civil liberties. Joining us today are Kristin Hansen, Mark Fruehauf, Liebert, and Honorable Judge James Babler. Through today's panel discussion, if anyone has any questions, please send them to us by using the chat function, and there will be a time at the end for the questions and answers. I will ask now to our first panelist to introduce herself. Kristin, would you like to start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristin Hansen. I work for the Campus Vote Project, which is a program of the Fair Elections Center out of DC. But I live here in Wisconsin, in Waukesha, actually, which is Potawatomi land. Our job is to help campuses help students vote. So I'm not throwing organizers out on campuses. I'm hiring fellows. Vivi is one of our fellows. We offer 2 paid fellowships on Superior's campus every year. And then we work with the Link Center to make sure they have all of the resources and the knowledge they need to break down any barriers there are to students voting. That is what we do. And we work on almost all of the UW campuses, several of the technical colleges, and almost all of the private colleges. I'm holding out for the Neshota Seminary. So we love doing this work, and we can prove our success in a way. There are reports that will come out. We call them the NSEL reports, National Study of Student Learning and Voting. And they will tell us what percentage of students on your campus voted last year. So that'll be interesting to see. And then the Link Center can use that information to make sure that they're reaching out to students in areas that didn't vote as well. And that's all anonymous information, but it's really helpful. And so if you have any questions about voting, literally like how to vote to make sure that you've got your rights all set in your head, the Link Center is where you should go. But I, of course, will be here to answer those questions too.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mark Fruehauf. I'm the district attorney here in Douglas County, born and raised here in Superior. I've been a practicing attorney since 2009. I started my career as a judicial law clerk in Minnesota. Spent 2 years working here as an assistant prosecutor. I then spent 4 years working in private practice, doing a lot of stuff, including criminal defense. I got elected DA in 2016, and I have been DA ever since. We do all things criminal that happen in this county, from disorderly conducts all the way up to the homicides. And I deal with elections every 4 years, and so this is a very interesting topic, and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Well, hey, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Sam Liebert, and I'm the state director for All Voting is Local. We are based in Washington, D.C., but we are in 8 states across the country. We are in Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and I think I'm missing one. But we work in states where we feel that there could be concerns with the election process. And so a lot of the work that we do is we work on holding election officials accountable. So whether that's municipal clerks, county county executives, mayors, anyone who may try to improperly influence any elections, we are there to sort of hold them account and put light onto them. We also work with a lot of volunteer groups where we engage with municipal clerks across the state, helping to recruit new poll workers, to expand voting hours, to help people get IDs. And we work within a statewide coalition of about 40 to 50 other groups within this space. A little bit about myself. For the past 5 or 6 years, I was in municipal government. I worked in 3 different municipalities. In most capacities, I was the municipal clerk. Before that, I served 3 terms on my hometown city council. So I'm originally from Janesville, and now I live in Waukesha County. And before that, I worked in politics. I worked for Mayor Baird of Milwaukee. I worked for President Obama. Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio is a U.S. Senator. I worked for our former Senator Russ Feingold. But I really enjoy working in this space because I get to help craft policy and really help educate not just the public, but also our legislators on hopefully passing good legislation that makes it easier to access the ballot box for all. And so I'm happy to be here to answer questions, and I'm looking forward to questions from the students. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. And James Babler, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jim Babler. I'm one of the 3 circuit judges in Barron County. I've been a lawyer since 1979. I started out as an assistant DA in Barron County, eventually became DA in 1982, served for 20 years as district attorney in Barron County. In 2001, I was prosecutor of the year for Wisconsin. I've been circuit judge, will be at the end of this month for another 20 years. Last year, I was voted circuit judge of the year for the state of Wisconsin by the state bar. I'm currently a member of the CCAP Oversight Committee, which handles the computer system. Many people know how to CCAP themselves or someone else within the state. And also just got off a 6-year term of being one of the deans of the Wisconsin Judicial College. And I'm a frequent lecturer on using our CCAP system, but also teach case management and calendaring for judges throughout the state.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, all. Sorry. The rest of the time is now open for discussion. So please send any questions related to nonpartisan voting and civic engagement you might have to the chat. Let's go ahead for the first question. What impact do you believe the Wisconsin Supreme Court has on the lives of citizens in the state? And how does the outcome of this race affect that impact? Kristin, if you want to start, yeah.
Great. First of all, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is a court you can vote for. Remember, the U.S. Supreme Court, you're voting for a president and a Senate who will appoint those people, but you don't have as much control over who sits on the U.S. Supreme Court as you do who sits on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. This position is a 10-year term. So when you're thinking about the impact of your vote, it's incredibly impactful. You are going to help select someone who will sit in that term for 10 years and will have a direct impact on the rights, civil liberties, and freedoms that we all enjoy in Wisconsin. The cases that are going to become in front of them probably, although we certainly don't know anything for sure, are going to include probably abortion rights, voting rights, gerrymandering and redistricting, certainly a lot of environmental law, potentially some things around the way the government is organized. who has permission to do what within the state government, is something that comes to the Supreme Court occasionally. And we have 7 members of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Right now, 4 of them are conservative, 3 of them are considered liberal judges. 1 of them has been a swing vote. So we're kind of in this place where this election will decide, is this a conservative leaning court? Is this a liberal leaning court? And then that Brian Hagedorn is probably going to be a swing vote still. So it does make a big difference. You'll hear things about flipping the court or changing the direction of the court or phraseology like that. That's not hyperbole. That is true. So I think the races in the spring, even for Supreme Court, generally have very low turnout. Student turnout in 2020 was 66%. That's very high for college students across the country. That was the average turnout. For this, if we get to 30%, I'll be super excited. I would love for you to come out and vote for this like you voted in a presidential race, because that it's almost maybe even more important than a presidential election. These are the people where the buck stops with laws and rights in Wisconsin. So please don't give up your chance to vote. Not every state gets to vote for their Supreme Court justices, but we do. So take that very important. Did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
100%. Yeah. Would you like to compliment something?
Sure. So the decisions of the Supreme Court are based upon the cases that come before it. And if anyone has had involvement in the legal system or seen it from afar, you know that it's slow. It is not meant to be a fast system where cases are decided rapidly. So the Supreme Court, your local courts, whatever, they're probably not bodies you're going to hear about on a daily basis in the news. The Supreme Court doesn't crank out 1,000 decisions or opinions a year. But when the Supreme Court does hand down a decision with a case that has finally made it to the Supreme Court, the effect of their ruling can be monumental. I mean, it can have a significant impact. So I agree with everything that Kristin had said. The impact is probably not felt on a day-to-day basis the way that other organizations and political bodies you might feel. But when the Supreme Court speaks, it is a very powerful ruling that is issued that can have long-reaching ramifications. So I do think the impact is significant.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Judge Babler or Sam, would you guys like to comment something?
Well, if I may, lots of times people focus on the sort of societal or touchy-feely issues that involve political issues, but much of what the Supreme Court does is very subtle and impacts the daily lives of people. They make decisions about how do you interpret insurance law, contract law, consumer law, zoning laws. They review the legality of what the executive and legislative branch have done. And so much of what you have, let's say when you get your insurance policy for a car, is there because of decisions by the Supreme Court. Those don't get the big headlines like issues of abortion or redistricting, but day-to-day decisions of the Supreme Court do affect the lives of all of our citizens. You just didn't know it.
Yeah, thank you. And Sam, would you like to finish?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what is said is, just dead on. The Supreme Court does have the ability to set precedent, create policy through their rulings and shaping our state's laws. But whichever candidate wins will have a say in the lives of Wisconsin citizens through laws and policies that they're going to be ruling on. Actually, in the last several years, the Supreme Court has ruled on a variety of issues that do impact everyday Wisconsinites, including we no longer have ballot return drop boxes, whether or not a local health officer can declare a public health emergency, to issues also relating to open record requests, right? The very process that helps us hold accountable our elected officials for their conduct in office. So every voter should make their voice heard in deciding who will be the next justice on these critical issues. And I'm hoping that everyone watching and partaking will take that to heart when they go to vote on April 4th.
Yeah, thank you. And considering the significance of this impact, we can go ahead to what can be done to increase awareness of the importance of this race and encourage more people to vote for it.
Do you want me to start again?
Oh, you can start if you want, for sure. I can follow this.
Yeah,
Sure.
go for it.
Lots of ads, commercials, they should mail out tons of things to people, that kind of thing. You should just be flooded with ads and stuff. I'm kidding, of course. People love all that stuff. Can I ask of the people in the room, how many of you were asked to come to this by a friend who has more knowledge about it? Okay, a couple of people. Very good. So a lot of people. So I think, once the election cycle starts, it's a matter of months, and people, it's always said by people that are running elections that this election is such an important election. It is a message that is said over and over with every single election that comes and goes. It's true, but I think it's very typical for people to just go, I thought the last one was the most important one. So if they aren't already interested, it's hard for me to say what we can do to get them interested, but short of spreading the message and getting people to come out to things like this, ask questions, that kind of thing. All you can do is just do your best to persuade others with message and argument that this is really important, and it is really important. It's a very important race.
Yeah.
So here, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make college students aware of elections. The April 4th, 4-4, really easy. Say it all the time. Tattoo it on your forehead. Tell all your friends. Media tag 4-4. And is just when is the election? So early voting is going to start March 21st. So you have actually 2 weeks before April 4th that you can go to probably the city clerk's office to take care of it ahead of time. You could request a ballot be sent to you in the mail. You can mail it back. But on the actual day, if that's how long you've waited, April 4th is the election. So that's a big part of it. The other part of it is telling each other. Peer-to-peer conversation is the best way for college students to help each other vote. So when you go vote, bring some friends with you. Make sure they're in the same dorm you are, or that they go to the same polling place. So part of things, college students have much more barriers and more confusing voting than the general public. So you, like, one of your dorms votes one place, the other one votes another place. So there's a fabulous website called myvote.wi.gov. Has everything you need to know how to vote. It's how to register to vote, what's going to happen when you get there, who's on your ballot. There's probably a lot of local elections on your ballot that we're not talking about. So check those out. Your polling place will be on there. So it's like finding those easy links and sharing them with each other is super important. But make your plan now for how and when you're going to vote, because life gets busy. And then all of a sudden it's the night of April 3rd and you're like, crap, I have a really busy day tomorrow. When am I going to get to the polls? So be thinking about that ahead of time. We just dropped off a whole bunch of swag. This QR code takes you to a special voting page on Campus Vote's website that is just about this election. It's got candidate guides. It has all the rules and regulations around voting for college students. One-stop shop.
Sam, just Babler?
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can do to increase turnout. Emphasizing, the more local a race is, the more impact it has. President and governor and Senate are sexy and all, but school board and city council races, mayoral races are just as important and have a lot of direct impact on you, whether or not your roads are being fixed, or you're drinking clean water, or when you call 911, you have a fast response. And so be sure to not just be paying attention to the big races, but also take 5, 10, 15 minutes and do some research on the folks who are running for local office. I think also too, engaging through digital media helps us reach wider audiences. Online ads, informative ads, and campaigns, I think, help raise awareness, especially for non-presidential years. And then, groups like myself and Kristin, we work for nonprofit advocacy groups. So I think continuing to invest in those types of groups, the sort of non-governmental groups, helps. We do things like conducting surveys, spreading information. We even sometimes hire, folks like campus organizers to work in the dorms or on campus to sort of do peer-to-peer outreach. So I think, like with a lot of these methods, we can work towards increasing turnout and just reinforcing the importance of voting in every election, not just every 4 years on presidential years.
Yeah, thank you. Judge Babler, you have something?
It's not my area of expertise about voter turnout. I'll wait for questions that relate to the law in the Supreme Court.
Okay, and still considering how it's important to students to vote, with many students facing barriers to voting, such as limited access to transportation and information, how can universities and colleges help to overcome these obstacles and promote student engagement in the voting process? We can start with Luna. We can start with Sam.
Yeah. So I think universities and colleges can take steps to ensure that students are able to access the voting process with ease and with accurate information. First, they can make sure that they're clearly posting information regarding when and where to vote, make sure it's easily accessible. Secondly, universities, colleges can make transportation arrangements such as busing to polling locations, free for students. We could also offer free educational events discussing the candidates and issues, such as what we're doing right now. Voter registration drives are always a great opportunity, I think, to engage your fellow students. And also, too, I think, this can provide, important nonpartisan information that you all need to make informed decisions as voters. So, by implementing these practices, universities and colleges, I think, can increase the engagement of students in the voting process and help break down any barriers. Like Kristin said, college students are, you guys are in a demographic where, you might not see it and or maybe you do, but there are a lot of barriers. And sometimes that's done on purpose. No one's going to say it, but these laws and rules were written by legislators. And when college students don't vote in large enough numbers, elections go different ways. So just be engaged, be aware, and be prepared before you walk into that polling location on election day.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else want to share something?
I will add that, well, first of all, there is an actual federal law, the Higher Education Act of 1965, says that college campuses have to help students register to vote. Of course, the law was written in 1965, so it says provide forms, but we don't do things on paper very often anymore. So it is the college's responsibility to help you register to vote and teach you how to vote, right? It's an education like anything else. You're a young person, you've never voted before. You can be an old person who's never voted before. Someone's got to tell you how to do it. There's also a federal law called the United States that says that students have the right to choose whether to vote at their campus address or their family home address. So if you're from another state, you might want to, there might be a hot election back home and you want to vote absentee to your home state. It is completely up to you whether you decide you want to vote where you live at school or where you live back with your family. So there are some actual laws that people should know about that make it important for the campus to do this work. I do believe it is the responsibility of any higher education institution to actually help create students who are full citizens and know how to vote. So yeah, I think they do have the responsibility. And again, all the things I said before, what are your rights? What are the responsibilities? Do you have the right kind of voter ID? I'm gonna get up on a soapbox for a second about that. The voter ID law in Wisconsin treats college students differently than any other person. You have harder voter ID laws than anyone else. So describing all of that, making sure students understand it is the responsibility of the campus. It is also the responsibility of the campus to provide an ID that will work for voting. If you're from Wisconsin and you have a Wisconsin driver's license or ID, you're golden, that's pretty good. If you don't, you have to get a voter ID from your campus. And it has to be a specific kind of voter ID, probably not your regular student ID at Superior. So you would need to go and get a special one. So all of those, making sure everyone is aware of all of those laws is important. And if the campus isn't going to tell you, it would just make it all that much harder.
Yeah, thank you. So, still talking about students, since we have a class full of them, what impact could the Wisconsin Supreme Court raise have on issues that directly affect college students, such as access to affordable education, student loan debt, and campus safety?
I'm going to defer to the lawyers on that one.
Would you like to start?
Sure, I can. I think a lot of the impact that a student will feel on those issues will not originate with the Supreme Court, but will originate with, the administration at the university, with the legislative body or the governor's office or something. Again, a Supreme Court ruling is only based on a case that makes its way all the way through the system to it. So like the student loan debt, I know, for example, there's a case pending before the federal Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, regarding President Biden's attempt to forgive $10,000 in student loans for certain students in the country. So that decision may have pretty big ramifications, of course, for students across the country. I think that's more of a federal issue than it is a state issue. So, some of that stuff with regard to like campus safety, student loan debt, I don't know what cases are before the state Supreme Court right now, but it would take a case getting there to put the Supreme Court of Wisconsin in a position to make that kind of a decision. If they were in position, though, they obviously could have a very significant impact on any of those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Judge James, would you like to say something about it?
Yes, I'd agree. It really has to do with what cases are pending, and there are times when there are cases pending before the Wisconsin Supreme Court that impact the Wisconsin university system. It could be about admissions. It could be about discipline. It could also be about tuition, what the legislature does or governor does. I don't know if there's any pending now, but it could be in the future. And so, when you're talking about a 10-year term, it is likely at some time during that term, the Supreme Court of Wisconsin would address issues that impact students within the state system.
Yes. Sam, would you like to add something?
I think both of the legal professionals covered most of it.
Okay, thank you. Going ahead about the candidates, how the candidates in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race differ in their judicial philosophies. Yeah. Would you like to start? Sam, since you're in the big screen already, can you start?
What was the question about how do they differ?
Sorry. How do the candidates in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race differ in their judicial philosophies?
So I'm representing my organization, and we don't usually get directly involved with candidates, whether the differences or policies. We are a C3 nonprofit, so we mostly work on information and education, but I would always direct people to vote411.org, and they usually have a lot of great information about nonpartisan, non-biased information about candidates for pretty much all elections. So I would just direct people there, but I don't have any direct comment on either the candidates and their philosophies.
Thank you, and that's important because we are nonpartisan. So yeah, would you like to say something?
I would just say we are doing a forum with Judge Protasiewicz and Rebecca Bradley, who is a current sitting justice and has endorsed Dan Kelly. Getting these two people in the same place at the same time has been a struggle. So that's as good as we got. March 28th, we're gonna be streaming that, so the campus can do a watch party. And that is the kind of question that would be perfect for that forum. So we'll see how they answer it themselves. I just looked at the nonpartisan voting guide. That is the only unbiased guide that our fellows are allowed to share, and we have some of them here. They're also on our website. And they talk about issues and they talk about a lot of their opinions, but judicial philosophy is not one of the questions that was asked. So I think that's best left to the candidates. I will say one other thing. People have different judicial philosophies, and that can sound very esoteric and kind of, you know, you might get more information about which candidate you want to vote for based on their opinions and values of other things. And by the way, the word's nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan election. That simply means the candidates are not running as Republicans or Democrats. So when you go to the voting booth, there won't be a D or an R next to their names. It does not mean that they are magical people that have no political leanings. It just means the race itself is not divided by party. So just to be clear about that too.
Yeah.
Judicial philosophy, not Andy.
Well, I did look at their websites and some of the interviews they had done prior to coming to this. I know, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to speak in terms of endorsing or putting down any candidate. Justice Kelly, former Justice Kelly, describes himself as a judicial conservative in terms of his philosophy, and Judge Protasewicz describes herself as a progressive candidate. So, you know, look at their websites, look at the interviews they have given to get more of a flavor for what their philosophy would be. I do think it's interesting. Both of them say about themselves and accuse the other of the opposite. Both of them seem to say that the job of a judge is not to rule based on what, you know, your preferred ruling would be, just that fits with your own worldview or your own preference, but you are to interpret the law and issue a ruling based upon the law, not as it should be, not as you think it should be, as it is written. The law oftentimes, however, is filled with a lot of terms like reasonable. If anyone goes to law school, they will hear the word reasonable in every class they take. What's reasonable to one person may be not reasonable to a different person. So there is a degree of interpretation that comes with any ruling a justice makes, because we're human beings and we are, you know, shaped by our own experiences and thoughts on things. But both judges running stress the importance of making decisions based on the law and not based upon activism or how they think things ought to be, just the law as it's written, whether they agree with it or not.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Okay, going ahead. Yeah. You have something? No, you can.
Well, on that point, it used to be that we can talk about activism versus restraint. And there used to be ideological divide between conservatives usually say they're for restraint and liberals would be activism. It seems that that is broken, that both of them are active on different set of issues. So wouldn't that make the judicial philosophy even that much more significant? You know, this is not an ice cream shop where you just want to go experiment ice cream. You're going to be stuck with the impact of who you select for the next 10 years. And they're both activists. Neither of them are passive. They both have their own agenda. Neither wants to say they're activists, but if you look at their actions, the courts have been extremely activist in the last few years.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very careful in my answer on that. I don't want to comment on who's an activist and who's not, but I will say that with any candidate that runs for any office, whether it's Supreme Court or district attorney, governor, whatever, look at the record. Look at a record of decisions and things that a candidate has said and done. I think that speaks volumes, obviously. So I guess I would leave it at that and encourage people, do your homework and look at what candidates say, but also look at what they've actually done.
I would agree with that. No candidate is ever going to say, I'm an activist judge, vote for me. And you should look at their websites. It does tell you something, but like any candidates, and there is an argument out there that Supreme Court justices maybe should be appointed on the state level and not elected, because we're looking at the most expensive Supreme Court race ever in the history of the country. There's an enormous amount of money being spent on this. There's a lot of things about it that feel icky. There's a lot of different opinions to have here. Every for anything on their own website makes themselves sound like the greatest idea ever, right? So take that all with a grain of salt, but do try to look at that and say, what is this person's values? And how closely do they align with my values? I think, and of course, the history of their decisions, they both are sitting judges, or at least Dan Kelly used to be. Janet Prosewicz is a sitting judge. So there are things you can dig around and find out if you want to do that much. I find sometimes it's more helpful to hear their direct answers to questions that are proposed by other people than to just what they wrote about themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. We have time for one more question. So, what impact might the outcome of the Wisconsin Supreme Court race have on key policy areas such as criminal justice reform, voting rights, and environmental protection? Judge
If I
Babler?
may start out, the Supreme Court, all of its decisions are important. It depends upon especially if you're one of the litigants. Sometimes there are very narrow issues that only apply to perhaps just two people or two parties or two organizations. Sometimes it really applies to the whole state. The world is political world's kind of in flux. And when it is, and when you have two sides that are in the political realm that's very close, sometimes the courts end up being the final arbiter of some of those because of the disputes. And so, it is really important for every citizen, but including students, to say, are these important issues to me? And if they are, to see what you think that this Supreme Court justice, looking at their record, what they have said, how they might rule on those issues which are important to you. Some of these issues may not be important to you, but for many people they are. And, I like to say, if you don't go vote, you shouldn't be complaining about what the outcome is, because you had a chance to impact that. And we should be voting whether or not it's a major controversy. That's what makes us different than many other countries. We get to vote for our officials, including our judicial officials. And, there's talks about whether they should be appointed or not appointed, but I think it's a good idea that we get to vote for our Supreme Court. You can imagine whatever political side you may be on could be stacked with a Supreme Court that doesn't reflect the electorate. You certainly want an Supreme Court that is responsive to the electorate.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So the question regarding what impact will it have on key policy areas? I mean, the Supreme Court isn't supposed to set policy, but their rulings certainly will shape how politicians in the executive and legislative branches will shape their policies. Rules regarding things like abortion and gerrymandering and the other sexy issues that we're talking about before. The people that have policy agendas are working within the confines of what's legal and what's not. And so if the Supreme Court issues rulings that impact those areas, that's going to have an impact in how others sort of carry the ball, if you will, with their decisions. And it's, as has been alluded to, it's a 10-year term. It's a long time. It's hard for me to remember when I wasn't DA, and I've only been DA for 2/3 of a Supreme Court term. So I've been DA for like 6.5 years, basically. So it is, and there's 7 justices, and it's staggered elections. So I don't know when the next one is, probably 3 years. Yeah. So this will happen again in a couple of years, and then a couple of years after that. So there's going to be continued opportunities for people to speak at the ballot box, but there's always going to be a fairly lengthy period of time where the Supreme Court you have is the Supreme Court you have, and nothing you can say or do is going to change that for years.
Yeah.
So
I'll give you an example out of Ohio, something that's happening right now. The Ohio legislature just passed, and I believe the governor signed, a new voter ID law that does not include college IDs. So no college student in Ohio who's not from Ohio will be able to vote in Ohio if this isn't changed. This is the kind of thing that is just a nightmare, right? That will eventually end up at the Ohio Supreme Court. So you need to look at that and say, is this court going to stand up for college students and say, hey, wait a minute, there is a federal law that says college students have a right to vote either at their campus address or at their home address. If we don't allow college IDs to be used for voting, how will they be able to access that right? So it really does depend. Are the people sitting on that court pro voting rights? Are they of the opinion that voting should be open, fair, and accessible? Or are they of the opinion that it should be locked down and hard to do? It's just, there are a lot of cases that can sneak up on you where you don't know about it. It's not in the media much. It's getting through the system. Like he said, it starts at this court and then it goes to an appeals court and then it eventually gets to the Supreme Court. And all of a sudden you're like, hey, wait a minute. That guy I voted for 8 years ago is now going to make this decision. I mean, it's kind of monumental. And I guess I can't stress enough that it's so important to lend your voice as young people. This will affect the next 10 years of your life. Lend your voice to these decisions, because otherwise everyone else is voting for you. The people who are going to come out to this election will be making these choices for you. And they might not be thinking of you when they do it. So this is why we use phrases like, vote your power, because it really is huge that you're helping to select who the next Supreme Court justice is going to be. No pressure.
Thank you. Sam, yeah, would you like to add some information?
Yeah, I want to be able to give folks time to ask some additional questions, but I know, yeah, I mean, the outcome of the court race, I think will have major impact on key policy areas, like you mentioned, criminal justice, environmental protection, voting rights. Obviously, I work in the voting rights space. So, for example, this Supreme Court decided that most drop boxes would not be allowed in Wisconsin, so that a voter, and also that a voter can't have someone else return their absentee ballot in person. So, you no longer can your spouse or your mom or dad return your ballot. Like, hey, I'm running past City Hall, I'll drop off your absentee ballot. You can no longer do that. The only exception is if the person is, medically confined or disabled. Can someone else return your ballot? So it's a huge loss for voters. Again, it's another one of those barriers that the Supreme Court has a lot of power when it comes to our elections and when it comes to accessing the ballot. And as we all know, election outcomes have a direct impact on Wisconsinites. And I do want to also just say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say it is International Women's Day. 6 of the 7 justices in Wisconsin are women. I think that's just incredible. The fact that women have had the right to vote for 100 years, and not just in our court, but I think there's another court. There might actually be one other state where I think every Supreme Court justice is a woman. But I think that says a lot about Wisconsin and our values. And I'm not endorsing Janet by any means, because former Justice Kelly also has a strong legal background and is just as legally qualified to run for the office. But I just wanted to mention that I think that's just a really neat historical aspect of Wisconsin, that, for being an upper Midwest state, we are a very forward-thinking state. And I think it's neat that we have this power. I have friends from all over the country that are calling and asking about the election, because it's literally the most important election in the country this year, and everyone's watching what we're going to do 1 week from yesterday.
Yeah, thank you. We now have time for questions and answers. So if anyone has any questions, yeah, sure. Okay.
So a lot of us in this room are like kind of like we talked about before, we choose to vote like in our home states.
Mhm.
Or just like a lot of students on our campus are like international students, so they're not citizens, so they can't vote.
Correct.
So what kind of things like what kind of impact will this like still have on us? Because we go to school in Wisconsin, but like also what can we, like what should we do? Because we can't vote, or we choose not to vote in Wisconsin.
I will say, if you can't vote, you can still help others vote. You can still remind all of the people here that they have an election on April 4th and how important it is. You can, if you feel comfortable, you can say, you know, you're kind of voting for me, like I can't vote here, but I hope you will, because somebody is gonna take my place. By the way, if you are in another state, if you go to campusvoteproject.org, there's a map of the United States on the front page. And if you just click on the state, all the voting rules for all of the states are right there. So yeah, I think you should have the discussions still. You should feel like you have to stay out of it because you're not going to vote here or because you're a non-citizen. We actually have a lot of fellows who are non-citizens because they're fascinated by the process of American voting, sometimes horrified by the process of American voting. But they want to help. I mean, I don't think Vivi is a citizen, right?
No.
So yeah, it's like they want to help be part of democracy. So 100% still talk about it, still ask people to vote, still tell them why it's so important. Have some arguments with each other. I mean, you guys are college students. Sit around and, you know, I was going to say get high. Don't do that. Sit around and talk about, like, do one of those things, like have a glass of wine and talk. Just each other, argue of the issues, you know, build up some passion for why you're going to vote and why your friends are going to vote. And I don't care what side of this all you're on, but like really get into those philosophical questions about rights. What are human rights? What are civil rights? What are our civil liberties? How are we going to have these discussions and make these choices for the rest of our lives? Take that time now that you're college students to have those deep talks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Just call in Jean. Sorry.
Jean has a question.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't see the hand. Yeah. You can unmute your microphone.
Okay, so I just wanted to use my experience to answer the question that was just asked. So until recently, I was not eligible to vote. And when I was not eligible to vote, there were topics on the political arena that was I was so passionate about. And what I always did is I challenged my husband, you know, my community members who are, you know, citizens to vote, because I'm like, that one vote represents my voice that I cannot put on the ballot, but you can if you vote. So a lot of the people in my community who are already eligible to vote were reluctant, like, why do I have to vote? My vote doesn't even count, you know, like so many other people always claim. And I was like, you have no idea if 2 people, 3 people, 4 people who are claiming that their vote doesn't count end up voting, then that's 4 votes that were not there that would count towards, you know, making a difference in our communities. And yeah, at that point in time, I was not able to vote, but I challenged many people in my community to go out and vote and, you know, explain the different policies that different candidates had to them because they were not interested in politics. I made it my mission to let them know, you know, this candidate goes for these. This is the interests that they look after, and these are their, you know, policies that they're going to help us as immigrants, as students, as women, as, you know, all those things that you want to tell people about. And I got a few people to go to the ballot, and yeah. Now I'm glad I can vote and put my voice, but I'll still go out there and, you know, still tell people to vote because it's important. My vote alone cannot make a difference. Everyone coming along will make much more difference than one vote. So that was my point for somebody who was asking about international students and other groups that are not eligible to vote.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, Jean, for sharing with us.
No
And
problem.
I have a question, if we can take one more. You've mentioned that the eyes of the country are on Wisconsin because this election is gonna impact the rest of the country, not just Wisconsin. Could you explain why, maybe give a couple of points as to why that is?
Take it. Let's
you
see.
want- I can briefly, I mean, yeah, so this is, like Kristin said, I mean, this is already not just the most expensive Supreme Court race in Wisconsin history, it's national history. I mean, some of these candidates have been running for months or almost a year, and within a week after the primary in February was over, they had already spent more money than they did the entire past year. And we still have 4 weeks to go. And so, you know, again, my association doesn't take any stance on some of the policy issues outside of sort of things that are in the voting realm, but you know, like Kristin said, this is either going to sort of cement this as a more conservatively viewed court, which would sort of probably support possibly laws that are already existing, or perhaps a court that might have more different view on things like abortion. So right now we have the 1849 law that prohibits abortion in Wisconsin, and some view Janet as someone who might, if it were to come to the courts, might be in favor of repealing that. There's also issues of redistricting. There's issues of, for those of you old enough to remember Act 10, which essentially sort of killed the unions, the public sector unions in Wisconsin. That's been talked about being revisited. Like I mentioned earlier, drop boxes could be reviewed for absentee voting. Voter ID could be reviewed. I mean, there used to be a day where you didn't need an ID to vote. And if you didn't have the proper documentation, if your neighbor came with you, they could literally just sign a little affidavit card attesting that you are who you say you are. And if either one of you were lying, you could be prosecuted. And it was a much more streamlined process in our association's opinion. So, you know, there's not a lot of elections in these off years. And so I think that's also a big part of it. And it's, you know, the media makes a lot of money the more that things are hyped up in these, you know, times, unfortunately. And so I think people in different political parties can sort of put their impression on either one of the candidates and sort of get out there. And so again, there's a lot of money in this race. A lot of it's from outside sources, and that's also usually readily available. You know, you can see who's donating to who. Yeah, this is, I think a lot of people see this as sort of a proxy election leading into 2024, you know, who has the energy or momentum and different things like that.
I think Sam is right. I think what the national media is doing is kind of making this a proxy referendum on abortion. Shortly after Roe v. Wade was overturned, Kansas had an election where they did put abortion rights on the ballot, and the people who wanted to keep abortion legal in Kansas won overwhelmingly. That was a shock to the system, kind of. We haven't had votes about abortion in this country, you know, in 50 years. So this is, I think that's why a lot of the national media is looking at this. They kind of want to see where Wisconsin is going. Wisconsin is a very 50-50 state. I mean, if you remember, the governor joked and said he won by a landslide. It was 3%. Like, these elections are really, really close. And actually, your local elections are even closer. You want to talk about how a vote can matter? These local elections will come down to a dozen votes, maybe. So it does matter to look at that ballot, look at who's running in all the local races and vote for those too. But I do think that's why the country is looking at this. Is Wisconsin going to stay to its progressive past? Or has it become more conservative, at least in a judicial way? That's what they're all looking at.
Thank you, Kristin. Yeah, how are you?
To what extent do you think that the Dobbs decision is going to affect, particularly in 2022 election? They mentioned younger women voting and younger people voting generally, and voting in favor of reproductive rights. Do you think that is going to be something of a factor here?
I think we'd be lying if we said it wasn't. There was a focus group done just a couple of weeks ago on Madison's campus. All of the women said they were voting based on reproductive freedom. All of them. There's even, I anecdotally know Republican women who said they are voting based on reproductive freedom, and they never have before in their lives, but they are now. So I think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade was a huge jolt to the system. And we will see what happens with that. But I think we'd all be living in la la land if we didn't think that was gonna be on people's minds. Either way, regardless of what your opinion is.
Thank you. We have to end it here, the panel, because some of the students have classes. But thank you all for attending the Link Center's panel on why the Wisconsin Supreme Court race matters. A special thank you for Kristin, Stan, Mark, and Judge Babler for sitting on our panel and providing us with your nonpartisan thoughts, experience, and reflections on today's topic. We greatly appreciate you all taking time off your schedules to be here with us today. And thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Vivian.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Charlie.